Dedication. This story is for anyone who has ever been over in a group project, and I certainly hope you enjoy it. Some details are deliberately vague because and I don't feel like getting sued. My backstory, not super necessary, but will give you insight into my logic. I've been teaching for many years, but it's important to understand that in my first year of teaching, I got put on blast by an elite group of EPs and their EKs. Not a week went by without someone either demanding my job, trying to undermine me, or just calling me a piece of ass. I nearly quit halfway through the first semester. The verbal and emotional abuse was so bad. This was at a school in a tough area, so I was accused of racism constantly for asking kids to stop talking, was ripped into for giving failing grades for missing work, and even enforcing the rules in the student parent handbook got me in hot water. My principal reprimanded me for being a negative influence on the school and was told that I needed to let more rules slide because he was tired of hearing from parents. I would have parents just show up unannounced to sit in on my lessons and then tell me I was a shitty educator, a bad human being, etc. I have plenty of horror stories from that school alone. But the point I want to make is that this experience defined the kind of teacher I became going forward to my next school. I needed to be that person who was untouchable because I needed to focus on the one job that mattered, teaching kids. My next school was in a fairly affluent area. It wasn't uncommon for me to find out that my students' parents made millions, which brought its own unique set of problems. However, my new principal was super supportive of me as long as I followed the school's handbook to the letter, because by doing so, I was in line with the school's philosophy and protected by law. We seriously had parents filing frivolous lawsuits all the damn time. This school had long ago learned that caving to parent demands spilled blood in the water and brought the rest of the sharks in droves. My first year at this new school was successful for many reasons, but primarily because the school culture was easily adapted to. By planning ahead, I was able to head off 99% of all negative parents at the pass. The few times a parent tried to rip into me at conferences, I ripped back so hard that I developed a reputation amongst the kids and parents as someone you couldn't samslan with. Everything I did was in line with the rules, and any attempt to take me down got stonewalled by my principal, who would have to say, "Mr. Fighter Jet is following school policy, so I'm afraid the ultimate decision is his." No joke, I had some parents in tears because their kid could no longer get an A in my class. I wasn't the teacher who wanted to destroy kids. I just wanted them to be accountable. And sometimes that meant letting them fail. Needless to say, this job became a lot of fun because instead of waiting to be ambushed by parents, I could work on making my class fun for my students while still teaching them something. I made ironclad rules for the classroom that brooked little argument and would adapt the following year to make it harder for students or parents to ruin my day. I have many stories like this, but this is one of my favorites. The backstory. The year this happened, I taught an HS class with grades 9 through 12. That's 14 to 18-year-olds for you overseas guests. My class wasn't necessary to graduate, but did count as a core requirement. One of my beginning of the year rules was I never want to hear when will we ever need this because you didn't have to sign up for this class. How I structure my class is that I try to make students accountable for their own actions. My class was built so that it had something to offer everybody. If you tried your best, you were guaranteed a C. If you worked really hard, you could get a B or an A. I would bust my ass to help a student with any reasonable request. The best example of this was a student was working hard on an assignment and said, "I think I understand it now, but can't turn it in on time." To which I answered, "Then turn it in tomorrow for full credit." This is how hard work pays off. Other than a few hard deadlines in my class, I would do whatever it took to see you learn the material. Around in my class, I have already found ways to run circles around the pathetic excuses you throw at your parents for your piss-poor performance. It sounds callous, but I was the teacher who would stay for 90 minutes after school to help you catch up, to help fix your project for another class, or even to listen to you cry about your parents' divorce. If I caught you goofing in class instead of doing your work, my rule was that at least 70% of class time was intended for homework, quizzes, etc. I would warn you a couple times, email your parents, and then wait and see if they even gave a If they didn't, I would let you keep digging that hole until you were hip deep in water and begging for a ladder. And then I would toss you a rope instead. You could still climb it if you tried hard enough, but a lot of kids would just cry until that hole caved in and buried them. I also utilized my school's online grading and assignment system for nearly all of my assignments, which meant I could document when a student looked at the assignment, how long it took them, etc. All of this allowed me to see what my students were doing when they did it, and also if they were plagiarizing. This was one of the tools that helped me make important decisions about leniency, and also allowed me to say things at conferences such as, "Of course, the test was hard. Your child didn't attempt the 9 homework assignments until 11 p.m. the night before the test." Being able to prove that a student wasn't trying made it impossible for blame to be laid unfairly at my feet. It also meant the worst kids avoided by class. Bonus. However, this year, something magical happened. Every other year, I would get a wave of kids who just wanted to screw around and blame everyone else for doing poorly. At the end of the year, students would talk me. My class sizes would drop the following year. Then I would receive high praise from those kids. So everyone would sign up, so on and so on. But this year, not only did I get a giant wave of knuckleheads, but they came with parents who love to make trouble. I had already heard tales of some of these parents. Other teachers were just dying to hear stories about our interactions because these parents were very much entitled. They would name drop lawyers when they didn't get their way, try to badger teachers into giving their kids extra credit, and would largely deny any wrongdoing on their kids' part. These were the parents who would get called in because their student was busted cheating, then accuse the teacher of making the class too hard, therefore validating their student's need to cheat. So about these knuckleheads, it was a group of roughly 7 senior boys who all shifted their schedules to be in the same period with each other. The other teachers could not believe that I had all of them at the same time, but I just shrugged it off. And every week the staff lounge was dying to know how I dealt with their shenanigans. But for the most part, I had shut down most of their backs from day one. I actually got along very well with them despite their constant goofing because they had mastered the ability to appear busy and didn't distract my other kids. Then came the first group project. My class size was just right for 7 groups of 4 to form. The Idiot Collective formed 2 groups of 4 by pulling in a kid who had been absent on the first day of the project. These 2 groups crashed and burned on this project super hard for several reasons, but the biggest were that A, they around during class time, and B, put off a toe assignment until the weekend before and then dumped all the work on everybody else, which resulted in everybody doing minimal effort. I handed out the batch grades and was immediately pulled into parent conferences with several of them, one at a time, obviously. Every meeting was the same. My kid did all the work, so he doesn't deserve a bad grade. Or my kid didn't understand the assignment, to which I handed over my hyper-specific rubric, which is a checklist for how I grade things. I never wanted to be accused of grading based on not liking a kid. These largely went like this: EP. My kid did all the work and I don't think it's fair it should hurt his grade. Me. Here is the work your student turned in. Hands it over. Here is my rubric, which I printed and emailed to your student the day the project started. Hands it over. As you can see, I have itemized the grading for ease of use. I would be happy to go over the grade your student earned. EP reads through all the evidence, looks at the kid. Where are the missing parts? My group members were responsible for that. I can't grade what I never received. So, I can't reasonably just raise your kid's grade. Sorry. Now, good news for all my students. I make assignments worth more throughout the semester with the idea that kids who screw up early on can make it up later by working hard. I see it extra credit throughout the semester, and all of these parents are disgruntled, but happy to hear that their entitled embryo can still get an A in my class. Now, the end result of these meetings was that it clearly wasn't my fault. Remember, I had all this data to prove that I made every effort to contact everybody, etc. So it must be the other kid's fault. So these parents all decide that their perfect angel is no longer allowed to work with their previous group mates. Like a cancer, this failure of friends distributes through the rest of the class. Like the genius that I am, I make my students write a group contract for every project that details who does what and when it is due. Why is this important? Because the contract provides me the documentation necessary to allow me to dismiss a bad group member and give them a 0 without their parents oinkstein all over my day. So here is where the problem begins manifesting. These seniors begin bouncing from group to group like cancerous ping pong balls, wreaking havoc. I let students choose their groups. So these seniors are desperately integrating with anybody that will have them. Because of my class side, every group has at least one coddled child to deal with. And these children just end up rotating until all of my students have worked with one of these seniors at some point. Now I am getting constant complaints from parents of other kids about these boys. Their kid wanted a good grade, which means they ended up doing all the work while the senior slacked. This is usually after the fact, at which time I bring up, I would love to yank that leech out of your grade pool, but you have to use the contract. Students don't want to say anything because they fear retribution from the seniors, but I can't do anything because I will be accused of harassment. The contract can provide me with the leverage I need to prove that these kids were doing no work because these seniors have been playing their parents for years. I make my class utilize Google Docs because the changes are time-stamped. No joke, I've had students produce all the work the morning of a parent meeting to try and lie their way out and make me look like a piece of Ralph. But that timestamp is a godsend. Luckily, my class is balanced. A shitty group mate can make things hard, but not undoable, and parents are appeased that I have an out for their kid, but disappointed that their kid doesn't use it. Every time I announce a group project is on the way, some of these seniors sucker up to the other kids to the point that it is expected that a spot will be made for them. I'm talking buying kids lunch, bringing them gifts, etc. Seriously, the day before a group project starts, all of the seniors now sit at separate tables from each other so that they could pull the "I'm already here, let's be in a group" card, which works most of the time. The strain on class morale is difficult, but I am biding my time. The other students are grabbing at extra credit opportunities constantly so that their grade can absorb the blow. And parent complaints are completely mitigated because I'm still offering every chance for success. My principal has a copy of my syllabus in his computer so that he can quote student policies that the parent signed off on. Not uncommon for him to hear. I don't read that one by Xing, so it doesn't apply. But he reminds them that the clause above the signature line says my signature denotes that I have read this document in its entirety and agreed to abide by all the rules or something similar, and that this should be a lesson to the parent and the student that when you sign something, you should read the fine print. If you ever become a teacher, find an awesome boss like this and stick by their side. The setup. So I have 7 slothful seniors, but I shall name the worst of these: Larry, Curly, and Mo. The fallout affects all of them, but these 3 are the ones whose parents have a boner for making trouble. Every time they bully a teacher into compliance, I imagine they sit around a smoking room with cigars and cognac, laughing at how they got their way yet again with a lowly teacher. I know that anything I do will be heavily scrutinized once the grades start falling, and I need to be able to shrug it off because I have other Heichgard to do, and I refuse to be the smiling topic of discussion in their celebratory circled jerk. However, a special note about Larry. Since he turned 18, his parents now travel non-stop and are impossible to reach. Larry is now just a huge douche because his parents no longer care about what he does. I closely monitor their grades in my class, but also in others. This may sound sketchy, but I routinely do this with any of my students who struggle with the material so that I can identify if the issue is my class or all of their classes. Students have been known fake their grades using Inspect Element, and I got tired of hearing, but they have A's in their other classes because then I look like the piece of shit. Anyway, after a check, I speak with the other teachers. It isn't hard.